Man, it was like 3,000 Hell's Angels at the cemetery for this funeral. I can't remember if he was a rival gang or if he was part of the HAs. I think he was part of the HAs. He shoots one of the main players in the San Jose chapter. It must have been maybe upwards of 4,000 bikers at this thing. I'm the homicide commander. They're calling me at home and they're saying, hey, we've got this funeral, blah, blah, blah. There was a shooting. It looks like it's going to turn into a homicide. Do you want us to lock it down? Meaning they could lock the scene, and seal all those guys in.
Like shut the cemetery so they're stuck in there?
Yeah, and I said, bad idea. So we just let them all go. Because, number one, we had a lot of film. And then, we ended up finding the gun anyway. It was in the bathroom in a false ceiling. So we found the gun. They were able to get DNA off of it. They were able to find out who did it. It was really, we used to have a saying, asshole versus asshole, no humans involved. So does it really matter if, anybody goes to jail or, because one asshole killed another asshole? And
are you saying he went up and point blank shot him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In front of everybody?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That guy must have had some stones to do that because
he went on the run and he was gone for quite a bit. We were trying to find him, and so were they. So were other. So
did you find him first, or did one asshole kill another asshole before that?
Yeah, no. We ended up arresting him. I don't remember the circumstances behind it. That's what I mean. It's like that year that I worked in homicide, we had 49 cases. And it was busy. I mean, it was for us, that was really busy. And I mean, that's not busy for a big city. But we also solved like 98% of our cases. So it's not like some cities where they solve 30%, cases just get unsolved.
Yeah.
So we were busy. And I don't know, I look back at that time and it's like, you're raising kids and you're doing this and you're doing that. And you're just like, things are, going a million miles an hour.
How old were you then? Like 30s?
Oh, no, I was almost 50.
Oh, so you were.
Yeah, I was pushing my retirement, it was, and at the time I hadn't really thought about it, but as it turned out, it was my last assignment. I after that, it was like I hit 50 and then one of my buddies called me and said, hey, I got this job. Are you interested? You want to, what are you going to do in retirement? And I said, I don't know, play golf. He's like, I got this job. You want to come over to San Jose State? And that's how I ended up going to San Jose State. And I wasn't going to stay very long, and I ended up staying 8 years. So anyway.
Tell me your name, who you are, where you're from.
Okay. My name is Alan Cavallo. I'm originally from San Jose, California. Transplant to Utah about 3.5 years ago.
And what did you do for a living?
I was a police officer in the city of San Jose for 26 plus years, and then I transferred over to San Jose State, and I was a commander, police officer there at San Jose State for almost 8 years.
How did you end up being a policeman?
Good question. I was a poor college student.
Meaning didn't have any money, or you were bad at school?
Both. No, I was at I was at Sacramento State going to college, playing golf, and taking pre-law classes and kind of thinking about law school.
You were on the golf team? Yeah. Were you good?
I was decent.
Yeah.
I mean, I made the travel team and didn't have to worry about practice, and, I just played. I just had fun at it. I was recruited out of out of high school to play at a major university, and that kind of backfired on me for different reasons. But anyway, I ended up at Sacramento State. I'm taking pre-law classes, so I'm really studying the law and kind of thinking that's where I want to go. And I'm in my 4.5 year of college, and I'm like, man, this is getting old. And a buddy of mine says, hey, I'm going to San Jose to take the police test. Are you interested? And I said, police test? He goes, yeah, I'm going to see if I can get a job with the police department. I said, okay, yeah, what the heck? I'll go. I mean, I'm from San Jose, so it wasn't like it was, foreign. I said, yeah, I'll go down and take the test. What the heck? So I went down there, no one in my family is a cop. There's no background whatsoever. I've never even been in a police car. So I take the test, and being a reasonably bright kid. I pass with flying colors, and I get a really high score, and I'm in the top 10. Next thing I know, they're calling me up and saying, "How would you like a job?" And I'm all, "Whoa, okay."
Hold on, are you still in school at this point?
I have graduated. I graduated.
Graduated, okay.
So I took the test in like November, and I got the call in April. So between that time, I had graduated. I moved in with my sister. I was working a couple different jobs, and just trying to figure life out.
Did you tell your parents you'd taken this test? Oh, yeah. What did they say?
There was a lot of apprehension. I was born and raised in what I would call probably upper middle class.
Yeah. What did your dad do?
He was an electrical engineer. Always worked for high tech.
Yeah.
He was always chasing the IPO thing. Never really got it, but he was always chasing it. And there was, I think, a little consternation and a little apprehension. So after I took the San Jose test, I actually started taking some of the other tests for different departments in the area, and I didn't do as well as I did on the San Jose test. So it was kind of a weird process. It was maybe just meant to be. I don't know. So San Jose comes knocking, and they're like, "Yeah, we want to do your background and would like to hire you." And so there's a big process for backgrounding a policeman, and it takes months. Well, it turns out my backgrounder was this guy named Dick Tush.
Terrible name.
I know. He was a neighbor, not close neighbor, but in the neighborhood. He rode motors predominantly, but motors is motorcycles for those of you that don't know. And that was his job on the police department. Then when he left motors, he went to backgrounds, and that became a full-time job for him. So he's my backgrounder. He calls me up. Well, it turns out that I ran from Dick Tush when I was 12 years old on my dirt bike. I had a dirt bike, and we used to ride in the hills behind our houses. Well, it became private property, and so then the cops started patrolling it, and I started getting in trouble. Well, he was out in the neighborhood, and I was on my dirt bike on the street, and that's not cool. So I ran and hid in my buddy's garage, and then walked home. And when I walked up the street, he was sitting up the hill waiting for me to come home. He didn't know, but he knew. Anyway, so when he calls me on the phone, I'm like, "Yeah, Mr. Tush, I don't know if you remember." And I knew his daughters from school, and I said, "I don't know if you remember me or not." And we chuckled about it, and it was kind of a fun story. Anyway, so this is 1985.
You're 22?
23.
Okay.
I get backgrounded. I pass background. I pass all the polys and all the nonsense. And I had a back injury when I was 20, and I thought it was going to prevent me from getting hired. It was a fairly significant, disc injury, and it was documented, and there was, film and everything else. And I thought for sure it was going to keep me out. And then the other thing is vision. And my vision was 20/40 uncorrected, and that's what you needed to get hired. So it was kind of weird. I think they've changed all of that now.
Are you saying if you had bad eyes, you couldn't be a policeman?
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
You had to have, wore glasses?
Right. You had to have 20/40 uncorrected.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, at the time. And there used to be a height requirement. I think they've done away with, basically all of that stuff. And I think it started to transition as I was there. So I got hired in April of 85 and go to the academy. And that's I think at the time it was like 18 weeks. And then from the academy, you go to field training, and field training is about another 18 weeks.
Is academy equivalent to boot camp kind of? Or?
Essentially.
Would they be rating you like they do at boot camp?
It was pretty funny. We had one TAC instructor that wanted to be our friend, and maybe they were playing the good guy, bad guy thing. We had a big class. We were 53, and it was big class. And the other guy was a kind of staunch, by the book, very, in your face. And then they had a couple other guys that would come in and do inspections. We had one ex-Marine. that would come in and do inspections. And yeah, and it's nitpicking, there's a thread here, there's a piece of hair, there's this, that. I used to rub my boots on the back of my pants because they wanted a certain shine on your boots. And I used to rub my boots on the back of my pants. Well, unbeknownst to me, it was leaving a black mark on the back of my pants. And of course you get gigged for it, and you have to do this and do that. And anyhow, I made it through the academy.
Did you like the academy or no? Did you enjoy it?
It was like class for the most part. There was a lot of physical portions to it. And I think that, I was always athletic and always in good shape. And, I didn't necessarily really work out until I got hired, but that was always part of my lifestyle was, so yes, I had one academy mate that sat behind me that he was just kind of a jerk. I mean, there was something about him that just, he liked to be a jerk. And I don't mean to say this in a negative light, because actually now I love the guy. He was a black guy, and he just had a chip on his shoulder. And I don't know what it was, but he and I got into it on, numerous occasions. I used to have to turn around and say, would you shut the fuck up? Because it just, excuse my French, but.
And Woody?
Yeah. And I think at some point in time, he kind of gained to respect me in a certain way, because I just didn't put up with it.
Anything, yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't put up with it.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, for the most part, the academy was great. It was, it was a good experience. And again, my folks were, I think it was more my mom than my dad. My mom, I think she worried about me,
like being dangerous.
Yeah. All the time. And I mean, I got to, San Jose, for the most part, is a very, safe city. Okay. It's always been, like one of the safest cities in America kind of thing. I think it's in the top 10 for large cities, being safe and blah, blah, blah. They have their issues, we lost, I think during the time that I was working there, we probably lost 5 guys. When I got hired the next year, we lost 2 right away in the same shooting. So, those things kind of bring it back to home, like, okay, you know what, this is actually real. And there are dangerous people on the street. And one of the things that was very remarkable about San Jose was the respect that criminals had for the department and for the uniform. And you could feel it when you put the uniform on and you hit the street and you talk to somebody. You could tell they were intimidated. And I'm talking about guys that are, hardcore criminals. They knew that if they screwed up, there was street justice. And back in the day, there was quite a bit of street justice. And you could count on your teammates and your partners to, back you up. And we worked solo in a car, by ourselves, no partners. Training officers, we had when we were in training, we had a partner officer because we didn't know what we were doing. We were getting trained. But once we were released from the program, from the field training program, we were on our own.
How long's field training?
It was about, I think, 18 weeks.
And are you stuck with the same guy the whole time?
No, you go through a rotation. So you do day shift, swing shift, and midnights. And each time you have a different training officer, and then you rotate back to your final 2 weeks are with your they call it a primary. And so whatever shift you started on, if you started on days, your primary was, back in day shift. If you started on swings, just depending on.
Where did you start on?
I think I started on days, if I remember right.
Was there some moment in there where you go, oh, this is all right? Did you enjoy that? The training with the guy, or no? Or were you like, oh, this is a mistake?
No, there was never a moment where I said this is a mistake. I made mistakes, and some ones that could have been, really pretty critical. And I was like,
for instance,
glad.
Like, what's a mistake?
Well, I remember a case where, so we're in patrol, and the job of a patrol officer is you're assigned to a designated area, and you basically are responsible for that area. So you're looking for criminal activity. You're trying to, help out people that need help for whatever reason within a particular area. You're issuing citations to, driver violations.
And how big's that area usually? How big was it there?
Well, the city of San Jose is 176 square miles.
Wow.
So it's pretty big. Each area is broken up into districts, and then within the district is a beat. And so you'd be assigned to a district. So at the beginning, I was assigned to District Lincoln. It was in the central east side of San Jose. And they tried to stick you in areas where the activity was pretty prolific. So there's a lot going on. There's crime. There's,
when you're first starting out, you mean?
Yeah. They want you in they don't want to put you in a sleepy part of town where, it's a bedroom, and they want you in areas where there's stuff going on. Yeah. So anyway, we had I think it was a car trying to make a car stop, and the guy fled on us, and my partner.
In car or on foot?
On foot. So my partner jumped out of the car because he was in the passenger side. I was the driver. And he ran after this suspect into the house by himself. And basically, hindsight and being through everything that I've been through, I'm not sure that was the best tactic, but he got mad at me because I didn't follow him. Because I was trying to set up where we were, who we were, going after, talking to communications, and not knowing, should I follow him or should I stay here with the car? Should I shut the car off, grab the key? Should I, not really knowing, right? And so I got chewed out really, by him or by the training officer.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, you need to figure out what you're doing, and you need to figure it out quickly. And for me, the really the hardest part of the whole training program was orientation. And it's funny because I grew up in San Jose, but I grew up in one part of it, and not knowing the rest of the city and it being that big, they require you, a call comes in, and back then it was all maps.
You just need to be able to book it there.
You need to know where you're going.
Yeah.
Right. And I knew kind of where I would go on my days off and drive around my area to try to figure out where things were.
Yeah.
So that I could get in the car and feel comfortable, knowing what was happening. I had my second FTO slept the whole time.
What's FTO?
Field training officer.
Okay. He slept the whole time?
He slept. He was
just in the passenger side of the car? Oh my gosh.
He was having kids. He was in the middle of, brand new babies, and he would get in the car and he was exhausted, and it'd be 11 o'clock at night because swing shift went from 3 to 1, and it'd be 11 o'clock at night, and we're out looking for, a drunk driver, or we're looking for, something to do. And he'd be asleep on the passenger side. And it's like, I'm thinking I need to try to make a car stop here. I need to try to, but I'm not sure if I should because I don't want to wake him up. So
for a policeman, most of the time, unless you're on another assignment, but just like a regular officer, you're kind of like, here's your space, stay in this, and find stuff to do that day.
Exactly.
It's not like.
Exactly. You have, there's all kinds of things going on at any given time, and depending on the location, you could have, there could be a festival going on in that spot. There could be a charity run. There could be, so there's all kinds. Always, you take any city and you figure out what's going on, right? But day in and day out, the mundane of, going out and hitting the streets and trying to, figure out, okay, my particular area has a crack cocaine problem. How are we going to address that crack cocaine problem and try to impact the citizens that live in that area so that we can make it better for them?
Right.
That they aren't having to deal with these guys dealing dope on the corners every day.
What did you think of everything once you started doing it? Like, I'm always assuming, police are kind of there to just take care of stuff that people don't want, regular citizens don't want to deal with. You see a lot of ugly stuff.
Well, they don't call us for coffee. right?
Yeah.
They don't call us for coffee. I mean, the reason you go to somebody's house is because it's a mess. And I don't mean physically a mess. I mean, you've got domestic violence, you've got, stabbings, you've got shootings, you've got, you kind of run into the same families over and over and over again, unfortunately. And it perpetuates through the generations. I actually saw kids as their parents aged out of the crime, or they were in prison, that their kids were coming up.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's a sad cycle. But you're right. I mean, it wasn't like the fire department where people are waving at you. Totally different story with the cops.
And you're seeing people pretty much at their worst, whether they're hurt
absolutely.
Or they're angry or they're drunk or they're...
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you, you said to me, how did I feel about it? After I got comfortable, and it took a year, 2 years before I really felt like, you know what, I kind of have a clue, and I actually connected with a guy who had some prior experience, and he sort of took me under his wing. And it's sort of funny because he didn't know anything else either. I mean, he did, but he didn't. And we just sort of hooked up, and we had common, interests. And his education, or just his drive to be better, really made me a lot better. And it I watched him, and I followed him, and I copied him, and it made me a better policeman for that. And then I got, like a team of guys that we all went through the academy together. We all ended up on the same team working midnights, so we're 9 at night till 7 in the morning. And we terrorized. I mean, we just terrorized in a good way. We had fun. And so,
for instance,
okay, how many times can you go to jail tonight? In other words, how many guys can you find to take to jail tonight? And it was like a competition. So it was like playing sports, but now we're working and we're getting paid for it. And we thought we were making all kinds of money, but we were making nothing, And they're paying us to do this. It's a
and what are you busting? Drug deals?
All kinds of stuff. DUIs, drug deals, you name it, robbers, the things that burglars, it's, you name it. It was the gamut. And we could kind of talk about that, but in terms of evolution of where my career went and how things evolved. But the first 5 years, I was thinking, man, this is unbelievable. They're paying me to do this, and I'm having so much fun. I can't believe I get to go to work. It's a huge adrenaline and thrill. Because the rush, I guess, is what, and I was an adrenaline junkie, always have been, probably still to a certain degree am. So it was.
What brought that rush? Just the
unknown, that hot call, we code 3 fill, you call is an officer needs help. He's calling for code 3 fills, which means it's light and sirens, and you're going. And you're trying to, so that kind of thrill, the call that, 415 weapons at such and such, and that's a fight with weapons at such and such a location, or shots fired at such and such a location. And you're just like, because, you're cruising around and you're waving at people and you're doing nothing. And the next thing you know, your blood pressure's up to, 190 over.
Give me some stories of this during this period. What stands out in your mind?
I have a funny story for you, and that is I'm pretty brand new. I've been on probably 2 years, and like I said, I'm working with this buddy of mine, and we're on the same team, and we're working midnights. And our sergeant used to let us ride together every once in a while, and he would allow that. So we had, I think, 5 guys on the team and a sergeant, and he would let each guy ride with somebody else on occasion, not all the time, because we had to cover areas and you just couldn't afford it. And if you have a guy out sick and you double a car up, now you're short, really short cars, And when you're talking about, large areas of distance, you got to kind of take all that into consideration. So one night we are working together. It's a 2-man, and we get a call of a stolen vehicle. Mundane call, go to the guy's house. He reports this car stolen. So we take the report. It's about 10 o'clock at night, and my partner looks at me as we're driving out, and he goes, "We're going to see this car tonight." I said, "You think so?" And he goes, I really do think we're going to see this car. As soon as he says that, the car goes by us the other direction, and it's on a fairly major thoroughfare. It was called Almaden Expressway, and in between the expressway was a divider, a cement divider. And I'm driving down to go to the light to make a U-turn, and he goes, "Go over the divider!" He's yelling at me. I'm like, okay. So, run the car over the divider, turn around, go after the car. So we get in behind the car, and we make the stop, and the car pulls over. We're like, okay. And it's the car. And it's got...
Hold on. Was there something unusual about the car? How did you know it was it? It was just...
Well, we had the description and the plate.
Oh, you had the plate. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know what kind of... it was a nondescript car in my mind. Okay. I don't even remember what it was. I know
it's so bizarre.
I know it had a sunroof, and I'll tell you why. This is pretty funny. Well, I think it's funny. People probably won't, but... So we make the stop, and the protocol on a high-risk car stop is you both open your doors, you draw down on the car with weapons, and you order the driver to do certain things in order to take him into custody. For whatever reason, we decided to approach the car. Wrong decision. My partner had a shotgun. I had my handgun. We approached the car, and I can't remember if there was more. I think there was only one guy in the car. When we approached the car, he looks at us, puts it in drive, and drives away. Now we're standing there. We can't shoot him because it's not that kind of an offense. And we're both standing there looking at each other. I run back to get in the car, and my partner, and I'm not going to say his name, but he's standing there holding his shotgun, and he goes... Because I'm in the car and the guy's, he's now, a couple blocks away, but we could still see him. And there's no one else out on the street. It's a really quiet night. And I'm like, he goes, "Go, go, go." So I leave him standing there holding a shotgun. And we're putting it out on the radio, and our, partners are coming in to try to help us. Well, I pick the car up a pretty short distance away from, and a pursuit ensues. And back then we were allowed to pursue. I don't know what their policy is now, but it changed a lot over the years. It went from pursuits to no pursuits because people were getting killed for no reason or for very, very minor offenses, that kind of thing. So there's a balance, right? So, but the traffic was light. It was late. I think it was 2:30 in the morning, it couldn't have been that late because we took this call. Anyway, there wasn't a lot of traffic on the road. As the other cars are flying by, my partner standing in the roadway, he's like, "Somebody pick me up." Of course, the dispatchers are listening to all of this, right? And they're like, "Well, there's an officer standing on the road with a shotgun, and this pursuit, this is all." It was pretty funny. So the pursuit goes. I'm putting it out. We go quite a ways. We end up on the freeway, and the supervisor's like, take them out, and meaning a pit maneuver. And that's a, tactical, take the car and try to punch it out a certain way and get it to spin out. I tried a couple different times when we were in different intersections throughout the city, but finally get on the freeway. And what I did is I rode up next to him with my driver's side and just pinned him against the retaining wall on the freeway and got him to stop. And I had to climb out the passenger side because my door is now wedged up against.
You've just pinched his car in there.
Yeah.
How fast were you going when you got up to the side of him?
I couldn't even tell. Probably in the 50s or 60s.
So
it wasn't super fast.
Mile an hour.
No, it wasn't super fast. It was like the guy was running, but he wasn't really running. He was like, if I just keep driving, they won't, So I jump out of the passenger side, and of course you can imagine the adrenaline. And the guy has a sunroof. So I jump up on top of the car and I pull him out through the sunroof. Literally, I didn't even know how I did it. I guess it was just pure adrenaline, but I literally just yanked him out of the seat of the car and pulled him up out of the sunroof. And as the sergeant's pulling up, he's like, okay, that's good, to calm me down, which was really, really good. Ironically, that sergeant was our TAC officer from the academy. At the time when he was at the academy, he was an officer. He became a sergeant, and now he wasn't my sergeant, but he was the sergeant in that area. And so he's the one who showed up. So, and we had a good relationship. It was pretty funny.
You must have been a beast doing that.
You'd be surprised what adrenaline can do for you. You'd be surprised.
Do you remember how old this guy was? Was he young?
Oh, he was a kid. He was, yeah.
I bet he was scared out of his gourd when you pulled him out of there.
Well, and the funny thing is, had we done it right, we would have gotten letters of commendation because, we took the call and we found the car and, blah, 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 right? We would have gotten a letter. Instead, we got kind of chastised for, not following procedure. And then the sergeant was after, the stop. He was like, I can't write this up. There's no way I can write this up. So we didn't get any kudos for it. And we really pretty much, the dispatcher that was on the call never let us live it down. It kind of rode with us for quite a while. It was a pretty funny story, though.
What other things happened early on that you remember? That's a good one.
Yeah, that was a funny story early on.
Would something like that happen every night? Was it pretty consistent?
No, that's the thing about police work is it could be so mundane and so, 1 week could be nothing. But for the most part, there was always something going on. So that was kind of what was intriguing about the job is no day was the same.
Yeah.
No 2 days were the same. You never really got in a rut of, man, I'm so bored. Because if you were bored, you went out and found stuff to do.
Yeah.
And there's always stuff to do. There was always people breaking into houses. That was one thing that my buddy was super good at, was finding burglars right after the fact. And it was like, how do you do that? And so it always intrigued me. And that was part of my learning process is to recognize what a criminal looked like, because I grew up, I'd never been in a police car, right? I didn't know what crooks look like. There's a look, when you've done the job for a while, there's a look. And especially people that have been to prison, you can spot them and you can tell, and they can tell, that those kinds of things. It's an interesting dynamic of the.
I always felt like, so a long time ago, I taught non-denominational church at the county jail, which was fascinating because they were freshly arrested, most of those guys, and in either awaiting trial or once in a while they'd been sentenced, but very rarely. But I always felt like there was kind of this weird symbiotic relationship between the prisoners and the guards, for instance, or people who are constantly committing crime and police. That there's kind of like this. They kind of need each other, kind of in a weird sort of way. Did you ever feel that way?
Yeah.
Like they know each other, and there's a odd respect, even if they didn't like each other.
Yeah. Well, there were guys that I definitely ran into over the course of my life or my career on numerous occasions and arrested them more than once. But it wasn't. I mean, there was respect. Like I said before, there was respect for us, for San Jose. That waned over the years with different things that happened, culturally and nationally and everything else, different things happened and that all of that changed and police work changed dramatically. And, they put handcuffs on us to keep us from doing things and to do our job. And I think that's what you're kind of seeing now in the shift of, hey, we've had 4 years of anarchy where crooks can basically do whatever they want and they know they're going to get away with it.
Yeah.
And they changed in California, especially changed a bunch of the laws to make everything misdemeanors and non-punishable. And so crooks just basically said, cool, let's go to work. I don't know, I don't know. Anyway, back to
good.
Early on.
You always hear stuff about domestic cases being really rough, like is a woman getting abused, and then you show up there, and then next thing you know, they're screaming at you. Can you talk about some of that?
Yeah, and I guess I would have to say that you, for the most part, you never went to those calls by yourself. So
a domestic call.
Yeah, you always had somebody go with you. That would be at least a 2-person call, and the dispatchers would know that, and they would never dispatch. Sometimes you show up and you're there by yourself to begin with, and then if it's going down right in front of you, you got to do something. You have to take some sort of action. And that happened from time to time, but you try to time your arrival too, or if it sounded like it was, hey, the reporting party is saying, they're hearing broken glass, and they're, somebody's threatening with a gun, and there's, so you would stage up a little bit before the location and then roll in with your party. As you mature in the job, you realize, those are the calls that are probably the most dangerous calls, because guys, depending on what seems like, when I think back on the guys that I know that got killed, a lot of them were domestic violence cases where, the suspect had a gun and knew the cops were coming, and the next thing you know, when the cops show up, he just opens up on them, that kind of thing. It seems like that happens more than, you like to know. It seems that happens more often than, say, like just a random car stop where the guy has a gun and shoots you on contact, that kind of thing. It seems like those are the most dangerous. And, I don't have any remarkable stories that I can remember. I just, you kind of gotten a routine of separating everybody, making sure that, there weren't any weapons available and things like that. You go through a routine of, you strip the couch first and then you put them on the couch. Okay. Or if somebody's aggressive, you put them in handcuffs right away before, and then you sort it out, and we went through a real transition of, when I first got hired, it seemed like the males always went to jail no matter what, it was like men always went to jail. But as domestic violence kind of evolved, or as the laws evolved, or society, or whatever you want to call it, it was then called the primary aggressor. So oftentimes the woman could go to jail,
Did that happen while you were out there?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Or both parties went to jail if you couldn't sort out who, But the thing is, like, in most of those cases, when you took both people to jail, nothing happened.
Right.
And the sad thing is that they're in a perpetual, violent relationship that they shouldn't be in. And, you end up having to, I don't know, I guess we end up taking the brunt, or paying the brunt of, of it. And it's just a never ending perpetual cycle of.
Would there be a lot of repeat? You'd go to a lot of places over and over again.
Yeah, and mostly it was repeat neighborhoods. I mean, It's hard to say that, but you just go to these neighborhoods where they're obviously struggling.
Yeah.
And, I think all that comes into play. There's alcohol, there's drug abuse, there's, and that comes into play. So yeah, you'd go back to the same places a lot.
How did your career evolve after that? How long were you doing that? And then what did you do next?
As a patrolman, you typically, if you have aspirations to do, other things, the nice thing about San Jose PD is we had a rotational process, and there's so many jobs in the police department that it's just, it's actually unbelievable how many different jobs you could have. So that was another thing that was really cool. I worked patrol 3.5 years, I think, something close to that. And then we were having a crack cocaine problem in San Jose. And it was pretty prolific, particularly in a couple different areas of town, where dealers were just blatantly standing on street corners and handing out crack cocaine like it was candy. And they didn't care. And, the neighbors were really getting fed up. And these guys were like taking over houses. They were taking over apartments that were vacant. The typical, you might see it on TV where it's just a crack house where there's people just drugged out all over the place. That was happening on a pretty regular basis. And so some of the higher ups decided we need to organize a team of guys that will work nothing but these areas of town and spend basically 10 hours a day saturating these types of crimes. And so they organized this unit called the NET unit. It was called Narcotics Enforcement Team. And it was a uniform in a regular car, but you had 10 hours to go out and arrest crack cocaine dealers.
Was that a normal shift, 10?
10 hours. Yeah, we worked 410s.
410s,
yeah,
okay.
Almost all of it was 410s.
Yeah, and your sole job at that point was, if you got on that task force, was to go bust drugs.
Absolutely. And so I was fortunate enough to get picked.
Did you put in for that, or did they just?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to have certain. You have to have shown something in your career that you are, you're a proactive policeman.
Yeah.
You can't just, hey, I want this job. So yeah, I tested for the position. I was selected. I was part of the second team. We had one first team, and then they decided, hey, we need a second team.
Yeah.
And I got on the second team, and there was only 4 of us on that team. It was pretty small, but we had great success, and we had weeks of arresting over 30 people a week.
Wow.
It was very busy.
What'd you learn through all that?
How to have fun. I learned a lot about myself. I learned that I wasn't Superman. I thought I was. When you first get hired and you get that badge and you get that ego, and I think it was about that time that my wife told me that I needed to check myself at the door. I think I was getting pretty cocky, and learned a few things. So, but it was exciting. We got to do a lot of different things. We could take a van out and park it on the street and put a guy in the van, and he could call out, dealers to us, and we would roll in. And
wow.
And I'm not kidding you that when I say it was almost like cockroaches. You'd pull in, and these people would just disperse like cockroaches, and then they're running in every direction. And every single one of them has dope on them.
So if you caught them, they're going to jail.
They were going to jail. And nowadays people would say, well, so what? Now those crimes are so diminished that why did we waste resources on that? Obviously back then it was a felony.
Yeah.
And these guys were doing state prison time for it, and maybe that was the wrong thing. Maybe it was something else, but that was tools we had to work with.
The rest of the people in the neighborhood, how did they take that? Were they mad that you were arresting those people, or they were happy that some semblance of peace was happening in the neighborhood?
They loved us. They loved us. They were getting their neighborhoods back. These people most of them were not even from our city. They were coming in from out of town.
Yeah.
And they were just posting up because they felt like San Jose was a pretty easy target. They weren't going to get harassed by the cops. That's why, we got this unit put together, and it lasted. Well, I think even to this day, there's still some form of it. It kind of evolved over the years, but I worked that unit for, I want to say it was like 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. And from there I went to the SWAT team, and it was a building block because, within the NET team, the Narcotics Enforcement Team, you learned, all kinds of tactics. You learned a lot of stuff about doing entries, on.
How often were you doing that?
Weekly.
No knock? Is that were they knock entries or no knock entries?
Both. It just depended on the crime. It depended on the suspect. A lot of knock warrants, knock and notice. But it helped to develop my skills and kind of put me in a position, to move forward in my career. And it wasn't I kind of look back on it and I go, I didn't set a plan out. There was no, spreadsheet or or diagram of, okay, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this. And actually, when I got hired, I always said, I'll do this for about 5 years and then I'll go to law school. Then I'll go do something else.
Is that what your parents thought you were going to do too?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
And what are they thinking at this point of your career? Are they getting used to it?
They're used to it, but they're also...
They're probably still worried.
They were part of the intervention with my wife.
Oh, because they thought it was going to your head?
Yeah. So they were part of that intervention. And it might have been a little bit later. It might have been after I got on the SWAT team, but it wasn't much after that. But
when you got on the SWAT team, what were you, 27, 28?
Younger than that. So 23, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 26. 26.
And how long were you on the SWAT team?
3 years the first time. And it's a rotational. So that's the other thing about the jobs at San Jose. Most of them were 3-year jobs. As a policeman, most of them were 3-year jobs. Some of the supervisory jobs were 5-year jobs. And then some of the jobs when I first got hired were lifetime, one of which was motors. If you got a motor position, it was a lifetime job. And so
what is that? What motor? Just pulling people over for...
It's traffic enforcement.
That's a lifetime thing?
It was. They corrected
to do that
it
for a lifetime?
Well, there were guys that wanted to because they could basically retire on duty. They got to ride their motorcycle home.
Oh.
They come to work and they write their 10 tickets and then they go hibernate. And they basically would retire on duty. And so they finally got it through and it changed to a 5-year assignment. And so that...
Or do you think someone changed that just to make it cherry for people to do that?
Well, they had to go through the union to get it changed because it was originally it was a lifetime position, but it became so stagnant that there was, unless a guy retired, there was never an opening. You couldn't get in there.
So does that put to rest? Is there a quota that they wanted?
There's no written quota.
Was there an unwritten one?
In traffic enforcement, they say you have 10 hours to write 10 tickets.
And if you're not cutting it, they get mad at you.
They don't do anything.
Oh.
There's no, you had to have a supervisor that paid attention that, basically would say, well, let me see your book. How you doing? What are we doing? And, and the unit evolved as they got the older guys out, and it got a lot better in terms of, being active and actually doing the job, because guys would go like sit on a stop sign and write 10 tickets. And it's like, what does that do? That doesn't slow people down. That doesn't prevent crap. It does in some respects, but the whole idea behind writing a ticket is it's supposed to slow people down and help prevent fatalities and things like that. And,
Did you do traffic at all?
I did 5.5 years in motors.
All right, let's be honest. Is there a way to get out of tickets that you thought was effective?
I pulled a lady over one day and she says to me, I got diarrhea really bad. I said, okay, go ahead. So yeah, there's a way.
Nobody's going to argue with that one, probably.
Right. So anyway, I went to the SWAT team.
And explain to me, so SWAT means, does that mean you're on call?
Well, it was
a SWAT things, or are you doing SWAT things your 10-hour shift?
It was a full-time position. The way that San Jose had it designed, it was called MERGE, Mobile Emergency Response Group and Equipment, and it was designed where there was 2 10-man teams, and then there was I believe it was a 10-man canine unit assigned to that same squad, and then the bomb squad assigned to that as well. As a SWAT team member, your day-to-day activity was felony arrests. Your responsibility was to make felony arrests, make an impact. So what we would do is we could go up to robbery or homicide or sexual assaults and say, hey, do you have work that needs to be done? We're willing to do it. So we worked plain clothes. No, I'm sorry.
And your task with taking the initiative on that.
Yes.
It's not like it just rolls down. You have to go looking for it.
You got to go looking for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
to an extent.
Yeah, some detectives were really good about, making sure that they got into briefings and said, "Hey, I'm looking for this guy," or they would push out flyers and things like that. And but you needed to be active. You needed to kind of dig and say, what can I do to,
And what percentage of guys on the force do you think were really actively doing that? Would you say? Is it the 80-20 rule?
Yeah.
So 20% are doing 80% of the.
Being active.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in what we would call special ops, which is where I was and going into merge with special ops. Anybody in those units, you wouldn't go in there unless you wanted to be proactive, unless you wanted to do stuff like that. That was part of the thrill.
And is your wife excited about you doing that or nervous about you doing that?
She never really talked to me about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think she worried, but I think she worried and didn't really talk about it. I think she just kind of, we both grew up together, right? We met each other when we were 16. And so she saw all this change and had to deal with it. And I think she was just kind of happy that I was happy, but probably scared too.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to take my dad out. I took her on a ride along too before we were married because we couldn't take her as husband and wife. I took her. I'll talk about that in a second. But I took my dad out one time when I was in merge, and again we worked in unmarked cars. They look like cop cars, but they're unmarked, and we were in uniform.
Those Ford.
Yeah, at the time they were. We were in Chrysler, not LeBarons, but they were Dodge. They were dogs. They were horrible. I think 80 miles an hour was top speed. They were awful. It was during the 80s. It was when the gas stuff was going. It was awful.
New U.S. cars were the worst back then.
And these cars were really bad. So I took my dad out on a ride along, and he was like, I think his eyeballs were, kind of the size of saucers, getting to see.
What happened on the ride along?
Nothing really. I was hoping, we would get into something, but nothing really happened. It was just, I made a few stops, and I think he was like, "That's what you do?" And I said, "Yeah," and it was.
Hold on. That what you do? That's mundane, or that's what you do?
That's what you do when it's mundane.
Oh,
and
I see. So he didn't. He never got to see any of the exciting stuff.
He didn't get to see anything good. When I took my wife on her ride along, it was that midnight team that we were young and we got a fatality, and I took her to that, and she was
a car wreck. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, she was pretty blown away by that. A guy ran into a light pole in a VW, a little VW bug, and killed his buddy. And so she, I took her to that, and so she was pretty blown away by it, and I mean, most people don't see that in their lifetime,
Did you ever get used to that? The car wrecks?
Yeah, you do. You kind of, it's a weird process, I guess. And after you asked me to do this interview, I was thinking back, and I was thinking about all my memories and stories, and I'm all, man, I don't even know if I'll remember stuff, but all of that stuff is somewhere back in the back of my head, and I think it just changes you as a person, and I saw some just, crazy, awful, and you don't get sick. Like, I never got sick to my stomach because it's so part of the job. It's so compartmentalized, or however you want to say it.
Do you feel like part of that was because you had a task to do at the time, so it wasn't like you were just sitting there ruminating over it. You were just like, there was stuff you had to do.
Right.
You didn't have to think about it too much.
No. And the only time I ever got a little queasy was a dead body in the trunk of a car that smelled awful. And there's a smell of dead bodies that just never changes, and you always know anytime you walked into a scene and it was a dead body that had been there for a while, it was like, okay, there's a dead person in here. And this one was in a trunk, and it had been sitting out baking in the sun for about a week, and it was awful. And
wow. Did you smell it even before you opened the trunk?
Oh yeah. It was like,
a couple of years ago, I was walking my dog at Liberty Park there, and it was a Sunday morning, and there was some activity. There were police cars in the center of the street, and I thought, oh, there must be a parade or something. And I pulled up, and there was a guy who'd been hit on a motorcycle, and they had put up a thing around the outside, a big square perimeter, and you could see the car that had hit him, and you could see his bike, and he was separated away from his bike. And it was surreal to me that he, and they had put a little thing around him, but just how casual everyone. I kept walking the park watching it, and it was so casual and so mundane and so odd to think, oh, somebody just lost his life out there.
Right.
And then you see the coroner or whoever pull up in the unmarked van.
Right.
But it still just took forever to, and I was like, wow, that's so strange that you would be seeing that every day.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully it wasn't every day, but I saw a lot, and I especially saw a lot when I was in Homicide. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It just, it definitely made me a different person, in terms of how I was when I was a kid versus, and as a young adult.
Yeah.
It changed me, made me way more cynical, made me more.
How can it not?
Yeah. You look at things through a different lens, I guess, is what you do. It changes how you look at things. And I've been out of the job now since 2019. And so I'm, 6 years removed, and I probably am a little bit more complacent than I used to be, never. So.
Or do you feel like doing the job, you were a little more on edge?
Oh, yeah.
Because you know what's possible.
Oh, yeah.
Because you've seen.
Yeah. And I mean, there were circumstances where, for instance, we killed this guy on a raid, and his wife / girlfriend, I don't know what she was. I think she was a girlfriend. I don't think she was his wife, moved into my neighborhood afterwards. And she knew that I was a cop and knew that I lived, and she knew where I lived. And that was kind of a turning point for saying, I got to get out of San Jose and move to an area where I'm not going to run into people that I'm enforcing. It was too close to home. I mean, she was literally, we would walk our dog past her house, and we had killed her husband, and it was like, no, I got to get out of here, so.
Back up. Now let's go back to SWAT.
Okay.
What happened during that? What was significant in your mind from that?
Well, I would say that particular case, and I wasn't one of the shooters on the team, but we had gotten a night indoor search warrant for a drug dealer. And again, you go back to this, drugs thing and how society looks at it now and what we're doing about it and so on and so forth. This guy was a convict, repeat offender, in and out of, custody for a lot of his adult life. He was dealing methamphetamine, and we got information that, he was at this house. He was wanted. He also had a bodyguard, and we knew about that. And the bodyguard was some guy that had just gotten out of prison. Some of the things we didn't know is that the house was fortified, and he was super paranoid because he thought other crooks were going to come and steal his stash.
Fortified meaning what?
He had barricaded the door with, and a part of it is I don't know specifically because the house ended up burning down, but I can tell you based on how hard it was to get through the door that it was fortified. Anyway, we had this night indoor search warrant, and we were crawling up this hill because it was up on this mountain top just outside. Well, it was still city limits, but it was up on this mountain, literally. And we're crawling through the weeds to get to this house because we couldn't drive up there because it was one way in, one way out, and he would, basically hear us and see us. So the idea was we staged down below and hiked up. Excuse me. And I remember my buddy, same guy that I'd, been in different units with, looking over at me and going, "This is so badass," or something to that effect. And I was like, yeah, okay. We had gotten up at 1 a.m. and we're climbing up this hill. And, at the time I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this is really cool. We get to the house, and I was on the entry team So I was always going through the door, whatever house it was. That was part of my assignment. And we had this one dude that was on the team that probably was on steroids. I don't know. He was huge. He was like 6'3" and weighed about 245 pounds, and he was ripped. He was the door guy. And so he started.
With the ram, is that thing? Yeah.
He started on the door and couldn't get it down. And there wasn't a door I didn't see that went down with this guy. And we're stacked up, ready to go. And it was a dynamic entry, which all of these tactics have changed since I was in there. And we were doing this dynamic entry on a dope dealer, which, like, why would you do that? But that's what we were doing. Finally, the door went down, and it must have been 40 seconds of banging on this door. So it probably felt like 5 minutes, but it was probably like 20 or 30 or 40 seconds. I don't know the exact timing on it. The door goes down. The number one guy goes through. The number two guy goes through. I'm number 3. And the next thing you know, shots are fired. And
are you in?
I'm in the house. I'm in the entryway of the house, and I'm being pushed from behind and pushed from the front backwards. The first guy in got hit several times. Our guy. He goes down. Second guy is basically retreating and firing. And so we're getting pushed out the door. So it's like, okay, we gather around the edges of this property, and bullets are going through the walls like nothing. I'm hearing them hit the car behind me, and I'm going, are those bullets? Because your mind is it goes really slow, but it's obviously going really fast. And bullets are pinging off the car. They're pinging off of all kinds of stuff. It was surreal. It was totally surreal. So we reorganize, we make a plan, we go in, we grab the officer, get him out of there. We're laying fire down. We had snipers up.
How many guys were with you on that team? Probably 10? More.
Would have been just one team. Well, did we have the other team? No, I don't think we had the other team. I think it was just the one. So it would have been 10 guys. But we had a couple snipers up. We had, backside support, front side support. We might have had a couple guys from the other team, but I can't remember. Anyway,
Was there yelling from in the house?
Not that I remember. And that's the weird thing. We're yelling, police, police, police. And there's, rounds are going off, and there's no ear protection. So it's like, things are ringing in your head. We go in.
You firing your weapon?
I did not. I didn't have anything to shoot at. All I had was things coming out at me. We get the guy out, rescue him, drag him to the corner of the house. And he was a big dude. He was 250-ish. And I remember the other guy, this guy, saying to me, we got to carry him to the ambulance, because we had an ambulance staged, and they drove up to the top of the hill. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know if I'm capable of carrying him up that hill because how big he is. And he goes, yes, you are. And we just picked him up and we carried him up the hill. And again, it's that adrenaline thing that you just don't
two
realize.
Guys.
Yeah. So we carried him up the hill, got him in the ambulance, and off he went. And everything at that point, there weren't, by the time we rescued him, the rounds had stopped. And then it was like, okay, now what? Well, we have to, try to order people out of the house. We have to, we go to the slow-mo of, what do we do to, fix this? And out comes the parolee bodyguard. Out comes this woman, wife, girlfriend, and then there was a child that was under 5, I believe. Well, the crook doesn't come out. And we keep yelling for him and yelling for him and yelling for him. He doesn't come out. So
does he say anything, or you don't know? You don't know if he's dead or alive or what?
Exactly. We don't know. We don't know what his status is. We start to introduce gas into the house to try to flush him out. And at the time, we were using what's called incendiary gas, and that burns. So the cartridge goes in. It ignites like a little fire within the cartridge, which then disperses the gas better. It's a more effective disbursement, but it's super dangerous because there's flame. Well, we shot a round into the bedroom, and it caught one of the curtains on fire in the bedroom. So the next thing you know, the curtains are on fire. Then the house is on fire. Geez. And we're still trying to order this guy out. And my boss, who was the commander of the unit, is standing there. And I've never seen a guy more calm under this much duress in that circumstance. He was like, everything was just, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And it was like, okay. And we just let the house burn to the ground. And guy burned up in it. That's why I say some of the circumstances we don't know, what exactly was going on inside. Subsequent investigation, a couple of our guys hit him. We think even maybe the first guy through the door hit him with a round, and then other guys hit him. So he might have just been wounded. We thought we were we were hearing crawling in the house or some kind of movement.
Yeah.
But we don't know. And he perished. And like I said, then, a couple weeks later, she ends up in my neighborhood, and it was pretty eye-opening. So that one was definitely a highlight reel of being scared shitless and, realizing, walls don't stop bullets. And all this time I thought, I was pretty bulletproof, quote unquote, and the guy that got shot got hit 5 times. He survived. Couple in the vest. At the time, our tactical gear was awful. We had beefed up tactical stuff, but nothing like we should have had, like full tac vests, full helmets. We didn't have full helmets. We should have had ear protection, eye protection, all of those things. We didn't have any of that stuff. It was like seat of our pants. We were badass. We could just do, we would take care of this, but, so, and then that actual case within the police department changed the policy on how we would do those kinds of search warrants, which was a good thing. We started doing, basically waiting for the guy to move and then taking him off. Because you can, on a car stop, you can do different things tactically that pretty much prevent any kind of violence. And then once you have the subject in custody, then go back and serve the search warrant. It makes it a whole lot safer. It's not necessarily totally safe because depending on who's at the house, but for the most part, if you have the main crook in custody, then.
So how did that night change you?
For a while I was pretty scared to go through doors, honestly, and I got back on the street within a short period of time because the guys that shot their guns were all put on quote unquote admin leave. They were all put on leave, and I was still working because I didn't shoot my gun. And so I'm out on the street working, and a call comes in. It was a bizarre call, and I hope I can remember the facts, but this lady calls saying that she just got a call from some guy wanting money to return her daughter. And he had a bunch of facts about her that made you think that it was pretty legit, that he'd actually kidnapped this girl. And I remember going to the house, and it was me and a couple other guys, and we had to go in and search this house. We were able to track him down, and back in the day, he was on a hard line, not on a cell phone, because there was no such thing.
And is the movie thing true? You had to keep him on the line a while to track it? Is that real or no?
Probably. I don't remember, but he was so stupid that he was on the phone for a period of time, and we tracked it and to this house. And I remember, and I want to say, if I remember right, this was where he said he had her capped. He was holding her.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to recall how and anyway, I remember going through the door and being scared, thinking I'm going to encounter this guy, and then what's going to happen? And there was no one there, but I was scared. And I just remember kind of putting myself in check and going, you got to just push through this, And so, through time, and doing, was doing probably 2-3 entries a week, you kind of get over it,
Wow.
Yeah, you get over it. And again, we did change some of our tactics, so it became a little bit more realistic in terms of safety and things like that. We also got better equipment because of it. We were able to squeeze the budget and say, what, we need tack vests, we need helmets, that kind of thing. And so things evolved. So that was definitely a case that I remember it well, the shooting, that is, but yeah.
What did you do after SWAT?
I went upstairs to robbery. So I went to investigations, and became a robbery detective. And again, another assignment, short assignment. It was a 3-year assignment. And that was a great job, because that's all you do all day long is track down robbers. So every case you have is a robbery. For those people that don't understand the difference between robbery and burglary, robbery is face-to-face. There's some force or fear.
Oh, okay.
There's either a gun or a weapon, or some intimidation involved, versus somebody sneaking around, stealing stuff and running away.
I did not know that.
These are typically pretty, brazen, bold characters that, yeah. So did that for 3 years.
Did you have good luck finding people?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot while I was in Merge, because we did a lot of work with them. And so I had some decent skills, but I also got a chance to work with some guys that were superstars that just had a knack for, and remembering, they would remember cases, so-and-so did this, 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden this case came up and it looks a lot like the same guy. In other words, the MO. And some of that happened. Our solve rate, all in all, I don't think it was, it was under 50%, I'm sure, but lots of good cases, lots of fun, really good cops in that unit, that, again, it's that kind of breed of cop that I worked with one guy that if he wasn't a cop, he would have been a crook. But he was that good, and he knew how to, he grew up with them. He knew how to talk to them. He knew, interviewing criminals, was a great learning experience. That was a great learning experience for me in terms of how to interview guys and, how to pull information out of people and how to get them to confess to things that you would think there's no way this guy's ever going to confess. The next thing you know, they're telling you all about it because they're proud of it, some funny things. So did that for 3 years. And from there I got promoted. So I went from officer to sergeant, and that would have been in 94. So that was 9 years into my career, 10 years into my career.
Early 30s somewhere, right?
Yeah, 30. Yeah, let's see, 23, 30, 33.
Yeah.
So I got promoted, and immediately when you get promoted, you get sent back to your roots. And so I went back to patrol, and now you're running a team. Now, instead of being on a team, you're running the team.
Yeah.
And so I got young guys. I think I went to midnights. I think I got lucky. Every time I got promoted, I got to go back to midnights.
Did you like that?
It was hard. It's hard.
And how long would you stay on that for a while?
Just depended on what was, like what.
Could you be on it for months?
You could be on it for years.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Every shift was a 6-month shift.
Oh, wow.
And then you got a chance to rebid. But if you had low seniority, you got to bid back to midnights. So that's how it worked. But I did. Yeah, I was in patrol. I think it was about 2.5 years as a sergeant. And then I got, it was kind of funny. I was in pre-processing, which was our kind of mini jail before you went to jail.
Yeah.
Then the guys would come in and they would process their prisoners, their photograph, fingerprints, dope samples, all that kind of stuff, right? And I was in there as a sergeant running pre-processing, and I get a call from one of the deputy chiefs or something, and he's like, you want to go upstairs? And I was hoping to go back to robbery. And I said, I said, what do you have in mind? And this is like talking to your boss's boss, right? So it was like really kind of an unusual phone call. And I'm all, I want to be respectful. I'm just like, yeah, what do you have in mind? And he's like, well, we have fraud open. And I'm all, I don't really want to work fraud, but okay. And I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what, but so I took it because it got me out of pre-processing and it got me back up into the bureau and, back to investigations, which is kind of what I wanted to do. And so I was in fraud for about 6 weeks and I hated it.
Not enough action in there.
It was checks mostly, and it was stupid. And it was a waste of time. And basically you wouldn't do anything unless it was at least $7,500. And these poor people would call up saying, I had my check was washed and $500 and, this and that. And I'd be like, you need to talk to so-and-so. You just couldn't do anything for them, So 6 weeks into this, the robbery unit had this big scandal. And I don't recall all the details, but there was some so we had this horse stable because we had horses as a police department, and they had their own stable, and it was off campus, so to speak. It was, quite a ways down in the middle of San Jose. Anyway, some of the robbery guys decided to throw a little party at the stables and invite a prostitute or hooker or whatever she was, a dancer. I don't know what she was. Needless to say, it didn't go well, and some guys got in trouble. And so there became an opening in robbery like immediately, because they just basically put those guys on leave until they investigated it and figured out what was going on. So I got a chance to switch from fraud to robbery as a sergeant right away, which was great and pretty unheard of because, for the most part, you needed to work your way.
Right.
You needed your bones. You needed to work your way up. So I got to go back to robbery as a sergeant. And again, great opportunity and fantastic.
Did you like managing people?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Oh,
no. It once I became a sergeant, the job became a job. Up until becoming a sergeant, it was fun.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you become a supervisor, it's a job.
Was there a big pay increase?
Every promotion was 15%. Not right away. It was increments.
Yeah.
But, those were, those were bumps, right? Yeah. And that was, at the time, we weren't getting raises regularly, so that was the only way you could get a raise.
Yeah.
Money was tight and, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it was a way to get promoted. And, everybody kept saying, well, wait till you retire. You want to get promoted, blah, blah, blah. And I never, I was like, whatever. Don't think about it. But so I did the robbery thing again for about 2 years. And then a motor opportunity came up, and this is riding motorcycles. And I really hemmed and hawed about it, but I never wanted to go there as an officer because of the stigma, because it didn't have a great stigma as an officer. It kind of like, because of the old school lazy guys, don't do anything. You can never find a motor officer when you need one. But this was when the unit was starting to transition and becoming a rotational job where.
And what's the significance of the motors guys though? Is it mostly traffic stuff?
It was it ran the gamut. So yes, the predominant job is traffic enforcement and accidents.
Yeah.
But the side job was all escorts, all festivals, all anything you could think of that had anything to do with traffic control or, riot control or, you name it. That's what motors did. So I got to do a bunch of escorts, presidential.
Did you have a mustache at this point?
Oh, yeah. You always had to have a mustache.
That's what I figured. Yeah. Is that true? You did?
Had it from the day I got
like
hired.
Chips?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Dark mustache, dark hair. I actually had a full head of hair.
Okay.
But, I think by then I was turning gray once I got into motors. I was having kids and turning gray. So, but
was that a 3-year stint, the motors?
So motors was a 5-year stint, and I actually got 5.5 because I came in a weird portion of the shift. I came in mid-shift. And that was a funny story because so they had an opening. I applied. The commander of the unit had specific guys that he wanted in there. He wanted his guys in there. And there was 2 old sergeants so there were 6 of us that applied for the position. And there was 2 openings. And he had 2 guys that he wanted to get the job. Well, you go to motor training and they tell you, and police training is kind of weird. They always tell you, if you don't do this, you'll fail, blah, blah, blah. And there's never any fail because they just they get you through it, right?
Yeah.
But motor training, there's a fail.
They're trying to wash people out.
It's 50% or more because it's very technical. And
is this a driving test?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Writing test,
yeah.
And it's super technical and it's very challenging. And I go to class and I'd ridden motorcycles my whole life. I mean, and I get on the bike and it's like, you want me to do what? Okay, and I didn't have really any significant issues except for a couple of turns. And there's everybody has a weak side and everybody has a strong side. And there was a couple things that, were plaguing me. I rented a trainer bike and went out and practiced in between because I was like, I'm going to make this, right? Well, and they kept saying, if you don't do this, you're going to fail, right? And I kept thinking in the back of my mind, that's bullshit. They're not going to fail anybody. They're going to pass us and then the lieutenant's going to pick who he wants, right?
Right.
Well, so one day goes by and one guy's gone. Another day goes by and another guy's gone. And it's like, wow, these guys are serious, right? So we literally get down to the last day of training. It's a 2-week class. We get down to the last day of qualifications, and there's only 2 of us, and there's only 2 spots. But if one of us had failed, or if both of us had failed, he would have to start over, because that's just the way it is. It's literally has to be this way. So this other guy and I both passed. So the lieutenant was stuck with us, and he didn't know us, and he was not happy, because his buddies didn't make it. And it was a funny process, but a great job and a lot of fun.
What bikes did you ride?
We started on Kawasaki's, the big K1000s, 800-pound beasts of, but a lot of fun. And again, you get a commute bike. I got to commute home on it. So I got my motorcycle in my garage. I take it back and forth to work. They pay for gas. In those 5.5 years, I probably rode 100,000 miles.
Wow. Anything sketchy happened while you were in that?
Escorting Bill Clinton, is that sketchy?
Could be.
It was.
If you end up on the list.
I know. Did
you do a lot of presidential stuff?
We did a lot of presidential escorts.
What was that like?
It was fun. It was interesting. And the difference between Bush and Clinton was night and day.
In what sense?
Bush was so thankful and appreciative of the police, and Clinton hated us.
Really? He wouldn't talk to you?
And you could tell. Yeah, you could absolutely tell.
Wow, that's interesting.
And it kind of goes like the whole Democrat-Republican thing, like in terms of the Democrats were always late. Clinton was always late, no matter what, and Bush was always on time, and it was like clockwork, right? And I mean, I think back remarkably in that, I had a lot of fun. I had I had 2 incidents that happened. One was a training accident, and the other one was on the freeway. We were doing an escort. We were actually doing an escort for Clinton, and one of the guys on my team was sick. And a lot of the escorts were, okay, you go to this point, and then we have to wait for them to glad hand everybody and get their money. Yeah. And then you go to another point, and then you go to another point, and it's like a lot of downtime. Well, we were sitting under the shade waiting to go somewhere, and he was sick as a dog. And I'm like, why don't you go home, right? He was sick. He was taking like some kind of daytime cold medicine, and he was sleeping on his motorcycle. So we get the call, okay, it's time to go. We get rolling, and we're going down the freeway at about 70, and escorts do this weird accordion thing. So the front takes off, and when you learn to ride an escort, you have to, the lead guy or lead team has to do everything like almost in slow motion because of the pull of the accordion to the back. So it's kind of like following somebody. If they take off on you, you're going to be way behind, right?
Yeah.
So it's that thing. Well, we're on the freeway and there's a huge accordion, and the next thing you know, for some reason, the motorcade was coming to a stop. Well, this guy next to me fell asleep on his bike at 70 miles an hour. Next thing I know, he's going ass over tea kettle down because he ran into the bike in front of him. Pardon me. He's tumbling down the freeway at 70. And I'm going, oh, this is not going to be good. This guy's going to be dead. So, everybody pulls over.
This is a
Clinton escort.
Motorcade.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like everybody pulls over. We, get him situated. He's now alert. We transport him to the hospital. The only thing that happened was he broke his thumb.
Unbelievable.
And, well, he hit his head really hard, and I think that kind of messed him up. He was a little goofy anyway, so it's hard to say if he was goofier. But, yeah, so I think because he was asleep, he just ragdolled. And literally, a little bit of road rash and a broken thumb, it was like he should have been completely broken, right? That one, and then there was one other deal where we always got to do these training exercises. I was lucky enough to get the training position about 3.5 years into the assignment, so I was in charge of training. And so every class that came through, because we were constantly training guys, we were even training outside agencies, and every class that would come through, I was responsible for. And anyway, we would do these training rides because part of the academy was 2 weeks on the grinder, so 2 weeks of slow stuff, and then 2 weeks in the mountains, to acclimate guys to, how to handle these bikes. And so we on occasion to throw the guys a bone, I would say, let's go on a training ride and go down to, whatever, Monterey or Carmel or someplace and have lunch and then come home. Well, we had this great back road that we would take all the time, and everybody knew it like the back of their hand. And we would rip on it. We'd just have a good time. Or riding along, and I got 2 lead instructors in front, and I'm like 4th, I think, and I'm listening. We've all got communications, and I'm listening to them jabbering. And next thing I know, the guy comes up on the radio, and he says, "Bike down." And I'm like, "Bike down?" In my head, I'm all, "Bike down? What do you mean, bike down?" And I'm thinking somebody, because it's a road motorcycles ride, and I'm thinking, oh, they must have come across a bike that went down, right? That's my thought. I pull up, and one of my guys had gone off the road, through a barbed wire fence, did a complete, and he went down hard. And this poor guy ended up breaking his back in multiple locations. We had to airlift him out. I'm down there, no cell service. By this time, we had cell phones. I have no cell service. I'm trying to call back to, the boss. So I go across the street, and it was pretty rural, but there was a house out there, and I go across the street, and I grab the lady's phone, and I call the office, and I'm like, hey, I got to airlift, this guy, and blah, blah, blah. And it was not good. The poor kid ended up with a cage in his spine. He ended up coming back to work for a short period of time, but basically it ruined his career, and he was a really good kid. Young, 28 years old, a young family, and it was kind of a tragedy, and it's like part of the job. Yeah, part of the job. So those are the 2. I don't know. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened in there. Yeah.
What happened after motor?
I was working for a guy that was very very motivating, and he was all, you have to get I was a sergeant. I'd been a sergeant for 10 years, and he goes, you got to get promoted. And I'm like, no, I don't. And he goes, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go back to patrol. He goes, no, you need to get promoted. And I'm all, no, I don't. And he goes, yes, you do. You need to think about your family. You need to think about your retirement. You need, blah, blah, blah. So he convinced me to study and try to get promoted to lieutenant. And he said, the way we're going to do this is you're going to get a job at internal affairs, because that's going to look good on your resume. And I'm all, and IA's like, not the place you want to go.
Because that's the
snitch
pariah.
police. Yeah. That's the snitch police, right? So you're policing the police. And I'm all, I can't do that. You go, yeah, you need to go to IA. That's where you need to go. So he makes a couple phone calls. The next thing I know, I'm getting a call from the lieutenant in IA, and he says, hey, I understand you're, looking for a job, blah, blah, blah. I got one for you. I said, all right. So I went to IA as a sergeant, and you just basically get inundated as soon as you walk through the door. Like, here's your 40 cases. Good luck.
Had you heard of some of them?
No, you never do. It's pretty hush-hush. Yeah, they pretty much take care of. The only time you would hear of a case would be either a shooting, because those are pretty public, but you don't know about the other side of the case because IA investigates those. And then anything where a guy might have gotten arrested, then you would have heard it. Otherwise, the regular cases you don't hear about.
Like, what's some examples of cases?
I had, like I said, I got hammered right when I walked through the door. I think I had 39 cases. I can tell you that some of it's completely stupid. A lot of it's use of force. He arrested me unlawfully. He put handcuffs on me and too tight. A lot of it was BS stuff. Yeah. It's like, I had a case that was completely ridiculous. The guy calls up and says, the officer stole my license plate. And I'm like, okay, well, why would he do that? Well, he stopped me and he took my plate. All right. So I start digging into it, and, it's like, okay, there's no plate booked into evidence. I'm like, start kind of figuring things out. I look to see, did the guy make this car stop? Because we could backtrack computer stuff. Yeah, he made the stop. There's nothing in there that says anything about it. I'm trying to think of the term, confiscating the plate for whatever reason, right? Maybe the plate's not the right plate on the car, right. Whatever, right? Maybe the tabs are wrong, whatever. So I call the guy up and I say, hey, I need to interview you. He goes, oh, let me guess. This is about the plate I stole. And I'm like, you need to think twice about what you say, on the phone. Let's get together. You need a rep, and, we should have an interview. Oh, no, don't worry about it. I did it. I'm like, dude, really? I mean, come on. So he came in, he interviewed, and he confessed. And basically what it turned out to be was he thought that the tabs were wrong. It turned out that they weren't, and he threw the plate away. So it wasn't, he didn't steal it, but he did take it, and he didn't do the right thing. And so he violated policy, and he ends up, getting, I think he got a day off or, something like, they end up getting discipline, so things like, but there were numerous cases of just nonsense, a lot of use of force cases, language. He swore at me. It's like, and that's part of our duty, man. You're not allowed to do that, but it's like, oh, okay, I have to waste my time with this and really, so a lot of it was nonsense. But I had a significant case that was very eerie, and some of me, in hindsight, and even all these years later, wishes I had done a little bit more, because I think he could have gone to jail. But it was a lieutenant stalking white females. He was a African American guy, and this guy was one of my friends. He was super well known. He was very good at his job, and he was a star on the rise. He would have been at least a captain, if not a deputy chief, in our organization. He was that well liked, and he was that good, and he was smart.
Yeah. So
he had a lot of good things going for him. Well, turns out he liked white females of a particular look, and he liked them when they had kids, and he stalked like 7 different women.
Wow.
while he was on patrol, and he ran their information, and he showed up at their doors or at their houses, and he would ask them out, and he was married.
They felt intimidated.
Oh, yeah. It was awful because, like I said, I was friends with him. I knew him personally.
Yeah.
And I had to investigate it and interview him, and basically got him demoted from lieutenant to officer. He probably should have gotten fired. Again, like I said, sometimes I think back on the investigation, and I think I could have, I was getting some pressure to finish, and it was at a point, I think it was 40 pages long, and I was like, okay, I'm talking to the commander of the unit that he was, that was going to go to, and he's like, where are we at? And I'm like, this is what I have, and this is what I can prove, and he's all, that's enough. Let's
Does the union defend him?
He had a rep when he came in.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, when it gets to that point, it's like.
Doesn't matter.
No.
What happened to your friendship with him? Was he mad at you?
Oh, yeah.
He quit talking to you?
Oh, yeah. He disappeared for a period of time, like he went on disability, probably fake disability, and then he went out to the airport. We had responsibility for the airport security, and he went out there and hid. And then for a while he was working the front desk, which is just an intake position, and he did that. And I don't think I even saw him a couple times after.
Wow.
So.
And how long did you do that job?
Thankfully, only 11 months because I got promoted. So.
And is that when you went to homicide then?
No. So then back to patrol. Because you got to go back to your roots, right?
Right.
So you go back to patrol, and of course I went back to patrol on midnights. But now you're responsible for an area. So you went from being responsible for a team, now I'm responsible for an entire area of the city. And often nights, there was only two of us on, and so one of us would have half the city, and the other one would have the other half of the city.
Does that mean you're going out? Or you
oh, yeah.
Oh, you are still going out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a patrol lieutenant's position,
okay.
So it's not a desk job.
Okay.
There's a lot of different aspects to it, but it's not a desk job. It's a,
Are you still having fun at this point or no?
No.
It's a job.
It's a job. It became a job. It became a job at, like I said, after I became a sergeant. I had a lot of fun in motors, but I also had teams. I had, your typical supervisory issues. You have some turd on your team that just takes up all your time. He just takes up all your time, and the rest of the team is picking up for him.
Yeah. And
you're like, dude, knock it off. Just, knock it off. And you can't get through to those people. So, but yeah, so no, it wasn't. I mean, it was fine, and I was making decent money. At least, considering my abilities, I was making decent money. And so I went and I did that. I was a patrol lieutenant for, let's see, I got promoted in, I can't remember. Anyway, for a short period of time. And one of my good friends was the deputy chief of field operations, Bureau of Field Operations, which is the biggest portion of the police department because it's all of the patrol division.
Oh, yeah.
So we had like 1,100 guys or something under it. He did something along those lines. I don't know. Anyway, numbers escape me. He calls me up and he goes, hey, he lived in my neighborhood and we were pretty good friends and we had worked together in robbery. And he knew me well, and we played golf together and things like that. So he calls me up and he goes, hey, you want to be my lieutenant? I'm like, Dan, do you want to be successful? I said, if you want to be successful, you don't want my help. Oh, no, you're going to be great. You're going to be great. Come on. And it was a big job. It was administrative, 100% administrative, which I hadn't done a lot of. So big learning curve, lots of moving parts, and I had to manage a team of guys who, basically staffed patrol 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with, all kinds of stuff. Right. And so I did that for, I can't even remember, but it was a period of time, at least a year and a half, I think, or something like that. And then in walks the captain in charge of special operations, Merge, but she also had NET, VSET, which is Violent Crimes Enforcement Team. She had canines, bombs, Merge, horses. So that job was a big job. She comes in and she says, "How would you like to be my Merge lieutenant?" And I'm like, so here's the funny part. She and I had been partners in Merge for 6 months. And I basically left and went and switched partners because I didn't want to work with her. And I didn't really ask her or tell her. So I didn't think she was really keen on me.
So you were surprised when she came to ask you?
Very much so. Very much so. And I hadn't had a lot of contact with her over the years.
Yeah.
She was one of these people that was a climber, a big climber.
Yeah.
And I kind of went along and did my job and, plotted and didn't really think that much about, hey,
climbing the rungs.
I want to be, the next chief, She wanted to be the next chief.
Yeah.
And so she, unbeknownst to me, and I don't know because I'm not a doctor and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but I think she was bipolar. She was very hard to work for. And so I took the job. I went over and I talked to the current lieutenant who was a friend of mine. And I said, tell me about it and blah, blah, blah. And so I think he blew some smoke up my ass. And I took the job. And the first 6 weeks I wanted out. I just absolutely couldn't stand her. Couldn't stand working for her. Couldn't work with her. We had a call out.
Was she micromanaging everything?
We had a call out, which is, they things go bad and it gets to the point where they need the SWAT team. Then they finally call the SWAT team in. We got one of those and we're out there. And it was like, I think it was my first one as the lieutenant, but trust me, I'd been there as an operator. So I kind of knew what to do.
Yeah.
And I had really good people under me as sergeants and they knew exactly what to do. And it was like, she's standing there, she shouldn't be in the mix. She should be up here going, do you need anything?
Yeah.
Or, hey, I'm seeing this and I want you to, take a look at this. Or, hey, what do you think? We need to correct this. But she's right in the mix, right? So the two of us are basically giving counter directions. And after that call out, I went to her office and I said, I'm out. Because if that's the way you want it, I can't work for you. You need to, you run the show that way, you do it. You don't need me. You just do it. Well, in her mind, because she wanted to be the next chief, she couldn't have any controversy. And so it would have been controversial for me to bail because I was super good friends with the deputy chief and the chief, and they knew my reputation.
Yeah.
And so it would have been a stain on her. And so we sorted through things and she let go and gave me a little bit of, freedom. And I ended up staying there 3.5 years, which typically those jobs were only 2 years. As a commander, they were typically 2 years, and I stayed 3.5. So I think I was pretty successful. I think I did a pretty good job. Had a lot of good calls and handled a lot of crap. Dealt with a lot of stuff. So
did you go from Homicide after to that?
So I went from Merge to Homicide.
Did you want to do that?
It was not a choice. I was it was funny. I was at a basketball tournament with my daughter in Minnesota, and it was like I was 3.5 years. It was like I was going to get rotated.
Yeah.
And usually it was every 2 years as a lieutenant you got rotated, but they let me stay, and so I knew I was coming up. And I just figured I'd go back to patrol and hang out for a couple of years and then retire because I was getting to that age. And the chief called me and he said, hey, and he was a friend of mine too. And he said, hey, how would you like to go to homicide? And I was like, I kind of thought about it. It was something I always wanted to do as an officer or as a sergeant, but I didn't do it because of the kids. It's a very demanding job that takes all of your time.
The homicide does.
Yeah, basically you have no control over your life. You're on call 24/7 and 365, and you really have no freedom. Talk to Melissa about it. I'm like, what do you think about this? This is like a pretty cool opportunity. Do you want? Should I try this? And she goes, yeah, I think, the kids were older. Megan was like 15, 16. And Alexa was, I think, already in college. And so it was like, I didn't have that much responsibility other than basketball tournaments and hanging out, that kind of thing. And so it was a good opportunity. So I took the homicide job. And,
So what's that, 2000, early 2000s?
No, because I retired in 2012. So it was 2010, 2009,
late 2000s.
2009,
Okay.
2010,
Yeah.
something like that. And so I had homicide for 2 years and then rotated out. Again, I I know it's subsequently been eclipsed, but I had the most homicides in history during my first year. And so it was busy. It was really busy, but it was so much fun. I mean, you talk about cream of the crop. The guys, almost all of them are sergeants. They did a sergeant officer combo thing. So we were six and six, I guess. 12 investigators. You have a crime scene unit, and just super smart, dedicated, tenacious bulldogs that just do outstanding work. And so it was a pleasure, to hang out with them. I'm like, I didn't have to investigate the cases, but I had to be there, and I had to supervise, and I had to.
So you were managing it then.
Managing. So it's a whole different, ball game. You're just juggling balls. Primary responsibility is to make sure that you keep the chief out of trouble with, whatever's happening, and I don't mean that in a negative light. I just mean, making sure that the cases that make the news are, covered, and that the guys are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And you never really had to worry. I got the opportunity to bring in some guys that were stars, just studs. And I mean, you catch a case and they were working, 40, 50, 60 hours later, they're still there and they haven't gone home, and a lot of times I didn't go home for 48 hours. I would just call home and say, I'm still here, trying to function.
Was that satisfying?
Yeah, really. It was fun. So it was back to being fun because I didn't have any headaches. There were no issues in the unit.
Cases stand out for you when you were there, in your mind? Or since it was all administrative, it was?
No, I mean, there were some really crazy things. We had, and I still to this day, I don't think they solved it. I don't even know if it was a homicide, but they found a woman in a barrel, literally like a 64-gallon drum barrel, in almost like not formaldehyde, but some sort of like substance that kept her sort of not, so she didn't, she was still there.
Yeah.
And she'd been in the barrel for a long time, and it was crazy. She was in a storage unit, and I know it was the stink that finally,
Wow.
And it traced it back to a missing persons case, and the detective that ended up getting it had actually worked it as a missing persons case, but I don't think he ever solved it, and I don't know if it was a homicide. I mean, she might have died. She might have OD'd, and somebody stuffed her in the barrel just to get rid of her.
Right.
Because she was a drug addict, but it was one of those cases that you just are like, and to see the pictures of her was bizarre, just bizarre. There was a good case, and I was trying to remember when you asked me to come down here. We had a murder-suicide in a strip mall Started in a bar, went out into the parking lot, and then the suicide happened in a bagel shop. And when it first came out, it sounded like a double homicide. And it was like, whoa, this is going to be crazy. You pull up and, here's a dead guy in the parking lot. And then, people are coming up to you. There's another dead guy. He's in the bagel shop and,
Jeez.
Blah, blah, blah. Right. And it was all gunshots. And the one in the bagel shop was pretty nasty because he shot himself. But it turned out that the suspect was the brother of a victim of another homicide. And this is the part that I'm a little fuzzy on, but the suspect was at this bar and the brother had been stalking him. He actually got arrested for the homicide, but then got released on some sort of like either bail or a technicality.
Yeah.
Something. He was out of custody and the brother knew about it. And so he tracked him down and then shot him and shot himself.
Wow.
So it was kind of crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a crazy one. But yeah, I mean, they're just good cases, and you
had a high success rate.
Yeah, I think our clearance rate was in the 90s.
Wow.
When I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it usually is. San Jose's was really pretty high. I mean, part of it is the community. When you get into a community where they don't want to talk to the police no matter what, you're going to have a hard time solving cases. Yeah. When you're in a community where people have some trust in the police and it's like, you get witnesses coming forward and things like that. It was pretty amazing to watch the detectives interview guys and get them to confess or, see the confession. And, you're all, wait a minute, this guy just committed a homicide and he's confessing,
So that's an art form they learn.
Total. Yeah, totally. And until you walk in and the guy says, I want a lawyer. Okay, well then we're going to have a tough time. That's the end of the interview, right? But these guys you learn the gift of gab. You learn, you learn how, catching, people and being, kind of polite or cordial or respectful of them. Next thing you know, they're telling you, telling you all kinds of stuff, and so.
So did you retire out of homicide then?
No, I went back to patrol.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Did you get another promotion then?
I tried. I tested for while I was in homicide, and that might have been why I didn't do as well because I was so busy. And I again, you go back hindsight and look at certain things that you did. I tried a technique that everybody was using to get promoted, and this is a testing technique, not the written test I did fine on. This was the oral, and this guy was kind of the guru of testing, and he was teaching everybody, this technique. Well, it was his technique, and it didn't fit my personality, And so when I went to go interview, I didn't interview me. I interviewed this guy.
Yeah. You weren't as authentic as you could have been.
I tried to be this other guy and think of all these things that he's come up with that, like they want to hear. And I would have done much better if I just, laid it out.
Yeah.
Me and knowing what I know and how, I would have been much better off. And so I ended up scoring. I was in I don't know, I think there was 25 of us on the list and I was like in the middle. And that's deep when you're captains. There's only 9 in the whole department, so you get maybe every promotion you get 1 or 2, maybe 3, and that's rare. So it was, I just knew that at 13, I think I wasn't going to get picked up.
Yeah.
I was too far down. And so I would have had to retest. Anyway, so I went back to patrol and I want to say, was I on day shift? I think by then I had enough seniority that I could go to days.
Finally at the end.
Yeah. I went to day shift and I didn't stay long. Only a couple months. And, retirement. So for San Jose PD, it was 25 years of age and 50 years of service. Or I'm sorry, 50 years of age and 25 years of service was the combo. And I was 50 and I had 26 years, a little over 26. And so I was eligible. But I was always going to stay my 30. That was good. That's the max. I was always in my head. I'm like, I'm just stay my 30. I'm here, a couple more years. I can do that standing on my head. And, like I said, this buddy of mine called me from San Jose State and he goes, hey, what are you going to do? I hear you're getting ready to retire or your retirement or whatever. And I said, I don't know. I'm going to, probably just hang out for a couple of years. He goes, well, I got this job opening, would you want to come over to San Jose State and, be a captain at San Jose State? And I was like, I honestly kind of thought twice about it, like really thought twice about it because it's such a different culture.
Yeah.
And never really had anything to do with the guys over at San Jose State, their own police department. From time to time we would stop in there and, say hello, but just never really had anything to do with them. Their campus, their downtown, heart of San Jose, downtown. And I was typically either east side or west side or south, or I just never was around there. So I decided to go ahead, interview for the job, got selected, got the job. And
you hadn't quit the other job yet?
No, I retired.
You did?
Yeah,
okay.
so I retired.
So you did retire.
I retired in November
yeah.
and took the job at San Jose State in January. In the meantime, I lost two of my relatives. I lost my father-in-law and mother-in-law in November and January of that year. So it was kind of a crazy time for all of us. And then I got this new job and started working there. And I always said, I'll stay a couple years. It enabled me so I was collecting my retirement from San Jose PD and collecting a salary from San Jose State because they were two separate entities.
Yeah.
So it was pretty nice. I was making money. And so I stayed and I was going to leave, but I was paying the kids college for, they were getting through without any debt. And I was like, this is fine. I'll keep doing this. I can put up with the headaches. And had a great boss who had a good direction and wanted to take the police department to a police department because when I went over there, it was like Mayberry RFD.
Yeah.
It was
totally different, right?
We had some door shakers is what we had. We didn't have cops. And he wanted to transform it into a police department. And rightfully so. You're in the heart of downtown San Jose. You get rapes, you get murders, you get, you name it, right? It happens on that campus. Sexual assaults, everything. You need competent people doing the job because that's their responsibility, right? So he tasked me with transforming the police department, which was great because it was like, okay, I can do that. We can make this work and I'll get these people to, get on board or get off, we'll do it, And so first couple of years we worked really hard and had some people that really wanted to be part of the program, some that didn't. There was some backstabbing. It was interesting because when I got hired, there was another captain. So the department was divided into two. One was like operations and the other was administration. And so there was two of us. He had administration and I was going to take operations. And I had actually, I didn't hire him, but I sat on his interview panel for that job. He came over from New York City as a lieutenant. He came on to San Jose State as a lieutenant, and I was part of his panel. And this goes back a whole bunch of years.
Right.
And so now all of a sudden I'm like, I remember you, and well, it turns out that he was a complete backstabber and I didn't know it. And it took me a while to figure it out, but he was, I don't know if he was jealous of mine and the chief's relationship or what the deal was, but there was all kinds of backstabbing going on. And there was just this behind the scenes torpedoing. And I remember walking into his office and saying, dude, not how I roll. And we're going to have a face-to-face conversation. And what was weird is he was, this great NY New York City cop, right? I thought, I didn't think he would be cut that way. And it was just weird. It was like his way of manipulating people was, backdooring them.
Right.
So he backdoored me a bunch and it became a problem. But we kind of had a head-to-head and sort of a meeting of the minds and came to, okay, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And anyway, so a few years into it, things are going well. We have a great administration, and they're supportive of us. They want, things under control. I mean, we had a homicide on campus that we ended up solving right away. We had an officer-involved shooting, which was good for me because I fresh out of homicide and I knew exactly what to do and how to handle it. I called the boss up and I said, hey, I just want to let you know we've got an officer-involved shooting. And he goes, what? Because he's home and I'm at work. And it was daylight. He said, what are you talking about? I said, we had an officer-involved shooting, and I don't think the guy's going to live. And he's like, okay, I'll be on my way, right? And so, the guy did die. And anyway, just, it was those kinds of things. So you're talking about real work, right?
Yeah.
Real police work
in
an environment of campus. And, the people that run the campus see things in a whole different light.
They're operating in their own little world.
Yeah, and it doesn't include violence, and it doesn't include, it's just different.
Right.
And so I had to learn to bite my tongue.
A lot more politics at the university. Yeah.
Bite my tongue. And thankfully I had him as a buffer, the chief. And so I could do my job and kind of, go to whatever meetings I needed to go to and, and just, push through. Met some, good people, had some good people working for us, hired some good people. Things were going well. We're about, am I 5 years into it? Probably close to probably 5 years into it. And we have a incident in the library. The library was a joint operation between the city of San Jose and San Jose State. And so it was a public library.
It was half university, half city.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's half, but it was way unusual. It was like, I think, one of only two in the country or some.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
8 stories high, beautiful library, but what do libraries bring in?
Homeless people
and everything else.
Yeah,
off the street.
Yeah,
and in a downtown environment, what do they bring in? Okay. When it's cold, when it's rainy, when it's hot, okay. So you're talking about, drugs, masturbation, pornography, all the things that weird criminals do, and they have free internet. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we have this library, we have a bunch of library security guards, and then a police officer assigned to the library, because every day somebody goes to jail from the library.
Yeah.
And this is a library for the students. However, it's somewhat overrun by the population of downtown San Jose, unfortunately, because it's a beautiful library.
Yeah.
So this kid, new officer, is assigned to the library, and he gets a call of a guy masturbating, which was a very common call in the library. So he goes to make contact with him, and the guy, we had cameras at the time and on our, wearing them on our chests. And so everything's on film. He goes up to the guy and he goes, sir, I'm going to need to see your identification. Because the guy closed up his laptop or whatever. And, and the officer said, I need to see your identification. And the guy looks up and he's like this cold stare, like 1,000-yard stare. And he says something about the devil, or he was Satan, or something, right?
Yeah.
So right now it's like bells are going off, right? Bing, 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 bing. You're like, this guy is high as a kite. He's, not right for, and the officer is trying to talk to him. He's trying to be, I'm just going to give you a citation, send you on your way, because it's a misdemeanor, I'm not committed in your presence, but you have somebody who's complained and, blah, blah, blah. So he's going to scratch him a citation, but he can't get the guy to give him his ID. He keeps telling him he's Satan on earth. That's what he was telling him. I'm Satan on earth. And, like I said, in my mind, after watching the film, I'm like, dude should have been calling for fills right now. Like, he needs more than one guy talking. He needs 2 or 3, because who knows what this guy's on, right? So he goes round and around with this guy for like 5 minutes trying to talk to him and trying to convince him that he needs to give him his ID. And the guy's just uncooperative. He reaches down to grab his arm to basically take him into custody, and the guy pulls away, right? So the officer's reaction to the, pulling away is to go grab him. Well, now the fight's on, right? Because, that's how it happens.
Yeah.
That's just how it happens.
Yeah.
What people don't understand is that reaction and then, the whole reaction and, other reaction. And so that's not the right term. But anyway, so the fight's on, and this guy gets tossed into a book rack and splits his head open, the suspect, and now blood's going everywhere. So it looks like,
somebody got murdered.
Yes. It looks horrible. And finally, Phil's get there and they get him into custody and, off he goes. And we don't really think much of it. We review it. We see the tape. There's some counseling. More than anything, it was like, dude, need to recognize when somebody's high. And the problem is you bring a brand new officer. This kid was brand new. You bring a brand new officer onto the campus, and their training takes 3 years what it takes a year in San Jose.
Yeah.
Because
they're not seeing anything.
They're not seeing it on a daily, right?
Yeah.
So it just takes longer.
Yeah.
It takes longer for them to get acclimated and to recognize things. And so it's like, okay, so we give them some training. We talk about the issues and, okay, end of scenario. Well, this guy goes to jail. The DA's office reviews the video and decides that he should have been charged with assaulting a police officer and a couple other things. They ended up it was kind of during the time when things were getting weird in terms of charging.
Yep.
They ended up charging him with a couple of misdemeanors, and he gets like 100 days in jail, right? And he should have been charged with felonies and everything else, right? Well, in the meantime, he sues, okay? And the university...
For assault?
He unlawful arrest and all this
police
other...
abuse
all of this nonsense, right? The university just goes, oh, we don't want to get involved in this, and they pay him $100,000 to go away, okay? Well, now they're questioning the officers, and the liability of it, right? And they go back to the chief and they say, we want this guy fired, this officer, because of this, because he assaulted this poor,
horny,
drug
abuser,
high as a kite, monster. He needs to be fired, right? So they pushed the termination through. He gets terminated, and it was total bullshit. We go to bat for him, and he goes through the process, and he gets on appeal. He wins, and he gets his job back. Well, the administration didn't like the fact that the chief and the captain and the lieutenant and a few other people went to bat for this kid, and they were pissed. They were pissed. And it was like from that day forward, the administrations and there had been a changing of the guard, new president, new CFO, and we dealt mostly with the CFO, the chief financial officer, and in the university directly. He was like responsible for the police department, and we got this new guy, and he was a milquetoast. He was I don't know. He was afraid of his own shadow. Yeah. He was absolutely afraid of his own shadow. And so the tension and the whole relationship with administration got very tenuous, and it changed. It was like from that moment forward, they basically wanted no enforcement.
Yeah. You guys were the enemy at that point.
And they wanted the new president wanted people to just go out and shake hands. Yeah. They wanted people to drive around and wave. They wanted people to pull on doorknobs. Yeah. They wanted people to open doors. They wanted gatekeepers. They didn't want a police department. Yeah. They would have abolished the police department if they could have, but they couldn't because it's part of an organization of 23 law enforcement agencies across the state.
Yeah.
So anyway, it made things difficult. My boss started to see the writing on the wall, and he's like, I'm out. And he comes to me and he goes, I'm leaving. And he tested for another agency, and he got the chief of police job in another agency. And I was like, thanks, Pete. And he's like, hey, don't worry, though. He goes, you're going to be the next chief. And I'm like, okay, sure. Sure. So they put me in as interim, and I run it for 14 months as the interim chief. Thought I did a pretty good job. Handled a lot of stuff. Handled 2 audits, one they called for and one that the state called for, and I dealt with both of them. One audit, I responded, I think it was 40 pages back to the CFO, and he never, ever said anything about anything that I wrote, because I wrote rebuttals, and I wrote, policy, and I wrote, this is how we do, this is why we do it, and this is what we do, and nothing, not a single word. So they decide they're going on a recruitment for the position full-time, and I apply, thinking, I probably have a decent shot.
Yeah,
what I didn't know is I had no shot. And so we test, we interview, and my interview didn't go very well. I had a glitch. I thought I was all dialed in on my iPad to do they did a Zoom interview, which was bullshit, but they did.
That's the middle of COVID, I guess?
No, it was actually before COVID, but their process, they typically did Zooms and then they did on campus because they had people from all over the country, right? And so
Zoom stuff's hard too.
I know, but my iPad fucked up and I didn't get it. I couldn't get it to come up.
Yeah.
So I had to talk to them on the phone, and they didn't like that, I think. Yeah. And so the interview, it didn't go as well as I thought it would go. And so there were, I forget how many people applied, but there were top 4 candidates and I wasn't one of them, right? So the top 4 were going to get on-campus interviews. So I was like, okay, fine. And my boss brings me into his office and he says, basically the panel, we just don't think you're qualified. I'd been a cop for 33 years and I had done every job you could imagine, and I could have worked circles around anybody that they hired, guaranteed. Okay. There wasn't a single thing I couldn't handle on that campus at that time. I felt very comfortable. Knew a bunch of people, had made great relationships with different, entities that I needed to make relationships with, kept my mouth shut, didn't piss anybody off, so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, not qualified. I get it. So the top candidates were a black lady, a Chinese guy, a white female, and I forget what the 4th one was. And it might have been only top 3. So I decide, fuck it, I'm out, right? I'm going to leave. And I could, because I was eligible for, and I'd done enough time, and I was going to get a small retirement from them, and it wasn't about that anyway. Kids were through school. I didn't need it. So I decide I'm going to go, and I walked into my boss's office. It was the best day of my life because they had hired they tried to hire the black female out of Chicago, but she looked into it and she said, I don't want anything to do with that, and bailed. And so they hired this white female out of Sacramento. And
did you know her?
I met with her one time over coffee and discussed the department with her. And then I wrote out a big, basically, here's all your issues, and these are the, pitfalls, and here's what to watch out for and things like that, right? So I wrote this whole thing out. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, I'm out. See ya. And he goes, you're not going to stay? I said, what do you mean? You're not going to help transition the new chief? I thought you'd stay and help. I said, no, I'm done. Good luck. And I walked away. Here's my resignation letter.
I bet that felt good.
It was great. It was great. And it was funny because I emotionally, after the fact, I was talking to one of the supervisors, and I got emotional, and it was like, I realized how much I put into the organization because I really kind of put my heart and soul into trying to fix them. You talk about, wanting to fix things, and I wanted to fix it, right? And I knew how to fix it, and it was like I had brought my best friend in, the buddy of mine that I worked with all those years and worked in the different units with. I brought him in, and he was under me, and we were going to do some, we had some great plans, and they blew it all up. They blew it all up. They hired this gal, and she had a great resume. She was what you call one of those resume builders.
Yep. And
there's a term, I don't know what people use, but there's a term for it. And she lasted a year. They fired her. And my old boss had the audacity to ask my buddy, do you think Alan would come back as the interim?
Did you say?
My buddy said,
no way.
No, he said, he goes, I told him what I thought you would probably say. And I said, fuck no. So,
wow.
Yeah. So
that's kind of it's a good way and a sad way to go out.
Yeah.
You realize that organizations are so political, they're not loyal to anybody.
Right. Yeah. But I could have stayed as the captain.
Yeah.
I could have stayed and done nothing, like literally done nothing, showed up, surfed the internet all day, go to coffee, go to lunch, and go home. Do nothing. Get paid a pretty good salary.
Yeah.
Right? For doing nothing.
Yeah.
But I didn't need it.
Yeah.
I didn't need the money. It wasn't about the money. And it really wasn't. I mean, it was like, it was just, but it was fine.
Okay. The last story I want you to finish up with is the story. You know how you told, was it your wife's roommate that got murdered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to hear that story.
Okay. So I get married in 1988 to my high school sweetheart. Hang on just a sec. Sorry. Her sister was 5 years younger, and her best friend was 5 years younger, and they were both big parts of our life. And this gal was at our wedding, and my sister-in-law and she were roommates with a third roommate in a really nice part of town.
What was her name?
Christy.
Okay.
And I didn't expect this. Christy, she caught the bouquet at our wedding. I'm sorry.
You're good.
She was a really sweet kid. And young, 20-year-old, 21 years old. And, we'd gotten to know her family. And like I said, she was living with my sister-in-law. And I have to guess, I know the story, but the day after our wedding, so we got married, well, it was 2 days, the day after our wedding, Sunday, so we got married Saturday, Sunday, we had like a little family reception, and then we went on our honeymoon on Monday, and apparently her next door neighbor had been stalking her, and he decided that he was going to rape her, and he was a convict, a parolee, and he had a cast on his arm from some injury. I don't know what that injury was, but anyway, he broke into their house. Christy was home alone, and Christy was a big girl. She was 5'10", probably weighed 130 pounds, very athletic, strong young girl. And she fought this guy tooth and nail, and so much so that the crime scene guys and the homicide guys that I talked to after said they'd never seen a scene like it. It was absolutely brutal. He cut her throat so deep that it was hanging on by one thread. He stabbed her so many times that they lost count. They were inside to this day, I don't know if there's been longer, but they were inside the apartment for 7 days working the crime scene. It was that hard. And they knew of him. They suspected him right away. He had gone to the hospital and gotten a new cast. They could never find the cast. And they interviewed him, but they couldn't get what they needed. They couldn't get any physical evidence out of the house to tie him to the scene. I talked to the homicide investigator that had the case, and he and I were pretty good friends, and he said, I absolutely know it's this guy. I know it. He goes, I can't prove it. And the case went cold for, when did I go to merge? 2007, 2008. So 20 years, right? Is that 20 years?
Wow.
So it went
that
cold.
Must have been so frustrating.
Went cold for 20 years. And then DNA changed and the technology changed. And the homicide lieutenant got a hold of me and he said, we got a break and we've got good DNA on him and we're going to get a warrant for him. And I want your team to go arrest him. And so I was in Merge at the time as the lieutenant, and I got the opportunity to go out thinking, we were going to go arrest this, parolee, badass, homicide suspect that, committed this murder on a friend of mine. And we set up on his house and, a couple hours watched what was going on. Turns out he lived with mom. And I think it was like a double wide, mobile home in the middle of central California. And anyway, we ended up taking him into custody, and he was a broken down 50-plus-year-old parolee that looked like some homeless guy. I mean, it was just it was sad to see him.
So anticlimactic.
Yeah. And it was almost as if he knew we were coming. Because he just basically turned around, put his hands behind his back, and, there was no...
Like a relief almost?
I don't know, maybe. There was no, what's this about? There no questions. He was stoic and, and broken, just broken. He ended up getting convicted, and I don't know what the sentence was. I want to say it might have even been life without parole, but I don't remember exactly. But it was, one of those deals. And it's crushing when it's, somebody close to home. And my parents met us at the airport, and they're the ones that had to break the news to us. That was awful, just awful. We saw her on a regular basis. It was like one of our family, and it was super devastating to her family, to her parents. They were great people, and they tried like crazy to keep it together, but it just ruined them, just ruined them.
Did you tell me they died before he was convicted?
Yeah, I believe both of them were gone.
Her parents died before.
Yeah, because, they were easily in their 50s when she, was murdered. And, so I think they were both gone. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. So sad.
Yeah.
It was a hard case and it was, my sister-in-law ended up living with us for about 1.5 years. And she was petrified, absolutely petrified. I remember coming home and she had a tough time.
Boy, the randomness of that, if you're close to somebody, that'll shake your confidence, that's for sure.
And luckily she didn't find her. Her other roommate did, who was just a roommate, but still that had to have been, pretty horrific for her. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry to get emotional.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, didn't expect that, but I guess that's what happens.
What's your takeaway from being a cop? What was the best thing? Let's start with what was the worst part of being a policeman when you look back at it?
I guess kind of seen, and I spoke to this a little bit earlier, is the perpetual families that just can't get out of it. As a citizen, normal, paying your taxes, doing your thing, and you're a law-abiding citizen, don't see, the perpetuation. And I guess that's probably one of the things is like, just how many families have, their grandfather, their father, their son have all been to prison, and the perpetuation of it. And why is that? Why do we have this? And then the other part of it is how evil people can be. There's some evil people, and you just kind of wonder, because there's some really nice people, but then there's this evil, and you see that evil and you just go, where does that come from? And if God made us all, in his light, or if that's your belief or whatever that, I don't know. I think it kind of took God away from me in a lot of respects. I don't know.
I can see that. I mean, if you're faced with that.
Yeah.
So I did this 5 years at the county jail doing non-denominational church, and I was kind of shocked at that, at the recidivism of people. And honestly, I thought, oh, gosh, there are people that are different, though.
Yeah.
Just different.
Yeah, the wiring, whatever.
Yeah, there's just something different.
Yeah.
I was like, that's just not normal. I don't think that's normal.
I did see a transition in young crime, youth crime, as in
what sense?
Some violent and pretty elaborate crimes that kids with no criminal history did.
For instance,
for robbery, kidnapping.
Of how old were they?
18, 19, 20, and they were all from very upper middle class, and they did a kidnapping of a Trader Joe's employees. So if you move employees from one point to another during a robbery, it's considered a kidnapping.
Yeah.
And they locked these people up in I think it was a freezer or storage something or other to do this robbery, and they were all so these kids that did it perpetuated it. At least one of them was an employee of Trader Joe's, so he was like the mastermind.
Yeah.
There was at least, I think, him and maybe one other person. I can't remember exactly. There was a couple kids involved in it.
Were they asking a ransom?
No, they were just going to do the robbery, but they moved these people, so it became a kidnapping, which ups the ante, like,
Was it them trying to the challenge of doing it?
That's,
you know what I mean?
So
was it them thinking they're really super smart? They're just gonna do it just because they can?
I think it's videos. I think they were watching and doing video games and kind of got
like
this,
Grand Theft Auto. They were gonna live that out. Some
kind of weird, because I saw it a couple different times on some cases. Excuse me, where literally no criminal history whatsoever, nothing as a juvenile, and all of a sudden they do this, heinous crime that puts them in prison, and you're like, holy, what did you do? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
And I just think that the more violent videos got, because I grew up, it was Pong, right? I mean, right?
or Tank.
Yeah. And or that, what was that little creature?
The Pac-Man.
Pac-Man, right? But next thing you know, all these people are, involved in these war crimes, or war games or whatever, and they're killing people, and you're like, you don't understand there's ramifications. It's not, you don't just reload the game or restart it, or, the game ends now. Now what? you know.
What was the best thing? What did you take away? What's the positive you took away from being a policeman?
My retirement.
Besides the obvious.
Yeah. What's the best thing?
And did that you were at for 32 years?
34.
And did it go by fast?
Yeah. Really fast. Because it was kind of in blocks of 10, right? Policeman for 10, sergeant for 10, lieutenant for 10, you know, or whatever, 7, and then I was a captain.
Yeah.
I would say the last, and those 8 years, even though, you know, at San Jose State, 7.5, whatever they were, they didn't necessarily go by fast, but I think they went by fast because my kids were in college.
Yeah.
We were traveling.
Yeah.
You know, this, that, and the other thing. I wish what was the best thing?
Well, you seem to have enjoyed it.
Yeah,
most of it. A lot of it, anyway.
Yeah.
There's the thrill of it and the challenge of it.
I would have to say that the camaraderie, there's a team, you know, thing about, you know, when you are part of that team, and you meet some, you know, I'm met my best man and he's still my best friend. And, you know, so I would have to say that, you know, probably that's the part you miss about the job. Like, you don't miss the job, you don't miss the bullshit that, you know, but you miss your buddies.
Yeah.
You know, I made some good relationships, and you know,
it's very similar to interviewing guys who were in battle and war.
Yeah.
Similar in the sense, a lot of boredom, a lot of downtime, a lot of political bullcrap, mixed with camaraderie, mixed with some moments of sheer terror or adrenaline.
Right.
It just,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely
see that. It all
see that.
meshes together in some weird form.
Yeah. We played hard while we worked, and we partied even harder. And, you know, and thankfully I got out of that or grew out of that, but there was times when we partied, you know.
You feel like that release was just part of pressure, or it was just a
I guess
wild man
doing
that?
You just, you know, I guess that's what we did.
Yeah.
You know, and it was around a lot of different things. Like, you know, we would go to Pismo Beach and go dirt bike riding, and, you know, and then there was a party afterwards, and, you know, those kinds of things, and just traveled with, you know, crazy people that, you know, but yeah, I would think the camaraderie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there was tons of downtime. Tons of it.
Which is probably why a lot of officers get into trouble.
Yep.
Doing stuff because
they're bored.
We were bored.
Yeah. So,
well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Hopefully.
That was pretty good. Let's go get some lunch.
Yeah,